This poor little baby. Yeah.
All right, good evening, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. I would like to welcome everybody. This is the Town of Loomis Joint Workshop. This is the Loomis Town Council and the Planning Commission together here at the Loomis Depot building. And we are on Zoom, and you can access that via our agenda, which is online. And I'd like to call the meeting to order, and let's do the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please. Councilmember Cartwright. Councilmember Baker.
Here.
Councilmember Clark-Kretz. Here. Councilmember Duncan.
Here.
Mayor Nisley.
Here.
Commissioner London.
Here.
Commissioner Kelly.
Here.
Commissioner Hogan.
Here.
Commissioner Youngblood.
Here.
Chairman Abradovich.
Here.
Thank you. Before we open up for public comment, there's a couple of housekeeping idea or things that I'd like to discuss tonight. And just to remind everybody that we are having our meeting based on the agenda tonight, which is discussing the general plan. Anything other than the general plan that you'd like to discuss, if it's a specific project, would have to be done prior to that in the public comment for items not on the agenda. So just please refrain from speaking about anything other than the general plan once we pass that point. When we do open it up for public comments on the main agenda item, I will be asking people that have not spoken first to please come up to the podium or raise their hand on Zoom, and then we'll go to the other people. Okay? All right. So for now, let's open it up for public comment for items not on the agenda.
Let's do that follow-up after the general comment.
Okay, after the comment, okay.
Okay.
Jesse Lunsford, 6133 Smokewood Court, here in Loomis. I know, what is he going to say today? All I want to say is last night I thought it was a great meeting. I think there should be a lot of attaboys. Hogan stumped me until I got about halfway home, and I realized his point. If we get bogged down in the Free Street and the affordable housing for the church, it's going to slow Andrew's whole calendar down, and I think you guys deserve to be on the vote when this comes up in November and not worry about a new town council, new planning commission come January. So I'd like very much that we stay on that calendar, and I now understand what the point was of getting bogged down in other things that are not part of the 3-inch binder. Also, Justin Mitch is not here. Spot zoning has been a scary topic on Facebook for so long. It was great to see an explanation. It's not something, I hate to put words in lawyers' mouths, but it's not something to be afraid of. It's something you can deal with. You deal with it on a regular basis, and we can always move forward. As far as the upzoning, downzoning chart, Christy, it confuses the heck out of me, but your chart actually did help me make sense of all the upzoning and downzoning. Okay. Jan, Bonnie, and Mary Beth, I go to a lot of meetings, and you guys have always been at the meetings for the last 2 years pushing this forward. So thank you very much. Jeff, thank you for stepping in between Jeff Mitchell and Jan. Thought we were going to have a duke out right there. My money would have gone Jan. Other than that, I expect Carol will be there going, you're out of your time, you're out of your time. I'm like, I'm almost there. This time, I'm done with my 2 minutes. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Jesse.
Jenny?
Just a couple of housekeeping real quick. The summer reading program kicks off this Saturday, 11 to 1. And there is the swim program and the concert series this weekend. I just had to throw that out there in public comment.
Thank you, Jenny. Mayor Nisley. Anybody else have any public comment for items not on the agenda?
I just
Bonnie.
have an event to announce.
You need to talk about. Sorry.
So SACOG is hosting Strong Towns, and the gentleman Charles Morone will be in Citrus Heights on Thursday, June 16th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And he's going to be talking about financially resilient transportation systems. So I thought that might be helpful.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. So we will just, I guess, go back to where we were last night. Do you want to go ahead, Anders?
Real quickly, last night a question came up about how we count the up designations from Bonnie, and Andres is ready to make a presentation tonight, and I think what you'll see is in the 2 years we've been working on this general plan, the state continues to change the goalposts for us, and this is one of those that got changed in the middle of the process, so if you will.
Yeah, so just not to waste too much time, but the question of no net loss has come up during a lot of the committee meetings, and it came up again last night. And Bonnie very reasonably went to the HCD website to see if they had any guidance, explanations on it, and they do have a memo about it. Unfortunately, that memo is dated October 2nd, 2019, and SB 330, which changed this law, was signed a week later by the governor on October 9th of 2019. So what Bonnie found were the old rules. Under the new rules, if we can jump ahead a couple slides here.
There we go.
One more. So now, under SB 330, there's kind of a general prohibition against reducing the intensity of land use, so reducing the density of a parcel. However, there's a carve-out for that. I'll actually jump ahead again. So you're prohibited from doing the following, changing the general plan land use designation, specific plan land use designation or zoning to a less intensive use, or reducing the intensity of land use. But, next slide, if you jump way, way down in a very long government code section, we're all the way down in subsection I for the exception, you can change it to a less intense use if at the same time you make up for that loss by upzoning increasing the intensity of land use designation somewhere else in town. That was how it was changed to be in 2019. There was a lot of confusion throughout the state about what it meant to simultaneously do this. And so in 2021, we got some additional new legislation that kind of clarifies what it means to concurrently change the designation that reduces it in one place and increases it somewhere else. What it means to do it concurrently is if you as the town, the plan commission and council decide to do that, concurrently means through the same action. You have to change them at the same time. If there's an applicant that comes in with a specific project that requests to reduce the intensity, you get 180 days to find some other site to make up that intensity. But that's only if it's initiated by an applicant, not if it's initiated by the town, like we would be doing through the general plan process. And then there's some other changes in there that have to do with what concurrently means in the case of a moratoria, and that's not really what we're dealing with here. So basically what it means is if you reduce the intensity now under SB 330, you have to simultaneously, through the same action, so when we adopt the general plan and we're reducing intensity, at that same time you have to make up for that lost development capacity at the same time. You have to find another site. We can't kick it down the road to another meeting. We can't kick it down for a couple of years. We have to make up that lost development potential.
I think one other thing maybe, it came up before the meeting, and it's probably a good point, but if somebody goes in and builds, say you have a piece of property that allows 40 units, but they only build 20, you have not lost your count because the land use designation is still for the 40, and so you're going to be okay there, because the assumption is somebody could always come in and tear down those 20 units and build the 40 at some point, as long as you have the land use designation. So it's based on the land use designation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make, is whenever you're looking at the development potential of a parcel, it's not what's already built there. It's not if there's a house in one corner, you could maybe squeeze in a couple more. You really just look at the acreage, you look at what the land use designation and zoning allow, and you assume that somebody could come in, tear down everything that's built on that parcel, and fully max out the parcel to what the land use designation and zoning allow. That's the development potential of a site that HCD considers. It's not what realistically is likely to happen. It's not what's possible based on what's already built on the parcel. It's assuming you tear everything down and build to the full potential under the land use designation and the zoning.
Seems to me then we really need to be mindful of when we do either upzone or downzone and try to have and be in coordination, just because again, once you upzone, you can't go backwards. So almost as if we have like, I guess, a reservoir of what we're planning, but don't actually do it until, you know, it seems like it's the transaction time to do it.
Well, you know, if the town does the general plan, you have to do it all at the same time. But one of the things that we discussed it last night, and it's not in the law and it's not clear, but some communities have done it, is they have said, we have up-designated X number of units in our town, and therefore we're holding them, and if somebody wants to come and reduce it, then we're going to take from that pool. That's not addressed in the law, and my guess is it's going to be addressed at some point in time by the courts. But there's a couple of communities that are monitoring that, and our thinking was we monitor that as part of your annual progress report, which is required for the housing element of the general plan, is we have a table in there to say, at this point in time, here's our reserve of units that we have increased the density that we can draw from. So
Yeah, and that kind of holding it in a bank of units essentially, I suspect that's going to be subject to some cleanup legislation pretty quickly, especially since we already got that clarification on what concurrently means. I wouldn't be surprised to see further clarification of that to most likely eliminate that kind of a thing where you're holding units just for the purpose of maybe being able to downzone something. But for right now, the point is, if you're going to downzone something, you really have to find something to upzone.
Are we done with the PowerPoint?
What about establishing parks and open space? Because I think we have a subdivision where this has been discussed.
So the upzoning and downzoning only applies to parcels where you can build residential units, where there's a number of residential units that can be built. So with that, is your concern about whether or not we can require parks for those acres that we're upzoning or downzoning?
Well, if you designate some land that I'm talking larger parcels, you want to make it open space or a park, is that downzone?
Yes.
Well, you could cluster them. So if you've got a 50-acre parcel and you've got let's do the math easy. You have a 46-acre parcel that allows 4.6 is the minimum size, right?
Yeah.
So you'd have 10 units on that. If you carved out a 20-acre park, you could conceivably get that same 46 units, same 10 units, but cluster them around the park, right?
Okay.
You'd increase the density on the other parcels,
Mm-hmm.
so you're still meeting that. You're not losing anything. You're
Right,
actually
lost.
right.
Okay.
And I think the development that you're talking about and the park area is already in general plan land use designated as public institution, so it's not counted for any kind of housing.
Good.
But I think the committee's already kind of considered this with that parcel of land that the school wants to build on. And the committee said, if in fact the school cuts a deal for the school property, then we're going to increase the density or the designation on the remainder of the property, keeping it level, so no net loss. Because changing it to public for a school would be a net loss. So we've already actually addressed it.
Okay, so Andrew, why don't you set us up tonight?
All right. So we went through the general plan last night and had a fair amount of discussion with comments. So tonight you're in the position of continuing to take public comment on the general plan and scoping, because we're doing that at the same time. And once that comes to a conclusion, then what we're going to ask is this group, the joint workshop, to make a recommendation to the staff to proceed with publishing the draft general plan for circulation and preparing the draft environmental impact report for circulation.
Okay, thank you. So then, we'll go ahead and open it up for public comment then. Unless anybody has any questions from last night. Have any dreams about last night? Okay, let's open it up for public comment.
Any members on our Zoom platform, you just need to raise your hand.
Somebody had their hand up. Somebody did. Maybe Miguel.
Any members in the public here? It's like,
Gene.
Jean.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify a statement that was made last night that the town couldn't afford a sphere of influence. Let me read the definition of a sphere of influence. A sphere of influence is a planning boundary outside of an agency's legal boundaries that designates the agency's probable future boundaries and service areas. It doesn't cost anything to get a sphere of influence until development occurs within that sphere of influence. What a sphere of influence basically does is allow a community to determine where it might go in the future and how that development might take place. An example, if we had a sphere of influence, on Sierra College Boulevard when it was the county, then it would be the town of Loomis determining the kind of development that would occur along Sierra College Boulevard, not the town of the city of Rockland. But I want to clarify that it doesn't cost anything to get a sphere of influence, and hopefully you'll have LAFCO come and explain the sphere of influence. And when we did the general plan 20 years ago, there was supposed to be a sphere of influence, but that never occurred, and LAFCO never, as they're supposed to by law, updated our sphere of influence. The statement was the sphere of influence would be the boundaries of the town of Loomis. So I would like this group or whatever group to look at having a sphere of influence to protect the town in the future. The question I have as far as the school property, currently that's zone 4.6. So if you take the school out, let's say they have 10 acres, you're going to lose 2 housing units. But with the rezone for the developer, you're going to end up with like 30 more units than you had. So wouldn't that be a plus for as far as housing? Thanks.
Andrew, do you want to answer that for him, please?
And I'm trying to go back and think about it, but as I recall, it was actually a break even, maybe +1. I'm sorry, what is it? It's a plus. Oh, it is a plus. Okay, so Christy's looking it up in her magic chart.
I think that's another question I have. If I'm understanding correctly what it's 31 units. It's not necessarily how many units are actually produced, but the potential that it can yield. So
Exactly. It has nothing to do with actual units produced. It has everything to do with the potential.
The potential.
the potential doesn't increase.
So the potential, according to the chart, is a 31 unit increase based on what was requested.
And I'd also like to add one additional clarification about sphere of influence. The 5-year obligation of LAFCO's is the municipal service review, which is just an evaluation of the capacity of local jurisdictions to take on a sphere of influence. It has nothing to do with them actually giving a sphere of influence to a local jurisdiction. It's just a 5-year review of the capacity to take on a sphere of influence. To actually extend your sphere of influence, that's never driven by LAFCO. That is an application that comes from a town or city to LAFCO. That's all I got on that.
Thank you. And Jean has her hand up.
Or am I unmuted with you now?
Yes.
Okay. Um, if we have a suggestion for something like a different proposal on the land use designation, is this the time that we should just make that verbally or write comments in?
It would be good to make it verbally now for the council commission to hear it, and I would follow up also with a letter, G.
Okay, so one of them is the Brace Road situation. And looking at the parcel sizes, it just seems to me the most practical thing. Rather, I understand why they would want the 4.6 originally, because they just basically want to go back to what it was originally. And that makes sense if you're thinking it that way. But since the parcel sizes are pretty much, except for I think one of them, around more or less around an acre, it seems to me it might make more sense to make them RR, and then you don't lose so many units. You'd still lose some, and maybe the one that's closest to the 2.3 acres, let them have the RE. If I think there was only one, but that would be my suggestion, to look at that as basically RR 1 acre parcels instead of the zoning it as the 2.3, and so that would get you back some of the units anyway, and maybe make that larger one, if it's only one, an RE one. And I think it's worth looking into the business park one to make them smaller, except one of the things that should be looked at carefully is the access, and make sure that you don't increase the number of parcels in there that are impractical to have the egress and being able to get into it, which was the problem for a business park in the first place, was not being able to get to it. So that should be taken into consideration if that different acreage is going to be, zoning is going to be 1 acre instead of 2.3. That's my comment.
Thank you, G. Anybody else?
Janet, you may proceed.
Hi, yes, thank you. Janet Van Wy, I live on Brace Road. I wanted to follow up on Jean's comments in respect to the neighborhood. It's my understanding that a proposal has been presented to allow egress from Brace Road to a potential development. I won't talk about the development, but I will talk about the proposal to grant that access. That access wasn't available when the property was purchased, and I'm imploring the council not to change the zoning on that and allow commercial access to the property from Brace Road. All of the residents in the neighborhood liked the neighborhood because it's rural, it's residential, and by allowing that access from Brace Road would potentially impact our neighborhood and change the quality of life and erode our property values. So, I'm asking the town council and the planning commission to really strongly consider that. We all purchased land in Loomis for a reason: quality of life, a small town atmosphere, and a safe place to raise our families. We want to maintain that atmosphere, and we're hoping that the town will support us in preserving that right. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else?
No, ma'am.
No? All right, we're going to bring it back for discussion with our panel. Yeah, let's do this.
No, well, okay then, are you ready for a motion, or you want
I'm
to
just
discuss?
ready for anybody to have, is there any more discussion on our part, or?
I pretty much said a lot last night. I was gonna kinda, lay a little low tonight, and let other people have their chance. But I'll have something to say in a minute.
Okay, anybody else, have any questions?
Okay, I'll go.
Okay.
Since everybody else is. So to kind of clarify this, as far as, you know, if we do this additional, you know, looking at the church property and the request to change from CT to RR, RA and RR, what would be the cost difference to the town if we incorporate it into the general plan as opposed to doing it, you know, if we weren't doing a general plan at this time?
You know, there will be some incremental costs for the traffic study, whatever, but if those projects are incorporated into the general plan process, I don't think you're going to see any substantial difference. If they go separately, because the applicant will pay for it, the town doesn't have cost, so the applicant will pay.
Okay, so that covers the church property.
Correct.
But if someone's asking, like on the lanes, Martin, they're asking, I would like to revert back to the old style or a compromise of RR.
Right.
I mean, how would that cost? You wouldn't need a traffic study for that, would you?
Well, we're doing a traffic study for the whole town, and what that will do is that modification of those land uses will show up in the traffic study. So I don't think we could put a dollar number on it. I think it's going to be minimal. It's just a matter of how you set up your assumptions.
Okay, that's good.
And I was going to say that it would be, the cost would be minimal as well, because we're considering the totality of the EIR, traffic study, all that. Those minor changes aren't going to be a significant cost in the grand scheme of what we're looking at.
I have a problem even discussing something that hasn't even had an application for. You know, they haven't formally given an application to the town, and so I don't even think.
Is this Brace Road or the church?
Well, both. The school has to deal with their part, but, I think they have an application, the school, or not.
The school and that, right, there is discussions going on. So you're not making a decision right now other than, do we look at that as we prepare the environmental impact report? When it comes back to the planning commission, you as a commission and then the council will specifically go through each one of those requests for a land use modification to make a decision.
Right,
So
and
we're not
then
asking for-
they would be responsible for the EIR on that.
If the school goes in, if the school wants to build on that site, then they are going to have to do an EIR on the school.
right, yes.
That's right.
Right, and then same with the other applicant, once they figure out what they want to do.
Then they are going to have to do an environmental document on their project, correct?
Correct, okay.
But I would like for the town to be able to do our own traffic studies on those areas where we think we're gonna have the biggest impact. And I think that would be Brace Road, that would be Barton and Rockland, just because from what I understand, traffic studies can yield different results depending on who's paying for it. So I would like for one that we're actually, looking at our needs, because again, long term, those are roads that haven't been maintained well, and I'm thinking particularly of Brace, where even 20 years ago in the general plan, it was identified as not being in very good condition, including the overpass, including the WPA bridge, and how much would it cost if we had to increase the intensity and the density. What is the long-term impact on the town for maintaining or replacing? So I think those are things I want to look at more deeply. And then also in the old general plan, they went through about the sensitivity of the areas with secret ravine. And so just some, again, in the environmental study, taking a look at what would happen if we had all of those TD sites along Brace Road being able to have, access, which had been discouraged up until now, the impact on that.
Let's go back to the first thing. I think, Sean, you may want to talk to this, but regarding this, the town doing its own traffic study, the town has changed their policy, and at this point in time, the town is responsible for the environmental document and selecting the traffic consultants. So in the case of a project that is presently before the town selected the environmental consultant is giving all direction to that environmental consultant for traffic
Yeah, and even prior to that, with the previous projects that we've had, so like Project X, whatever Project X is, hires a traffic consultant. Traffic consultant does the preparation of the traffic study. Traffic study goes into the EIR, but the town's consultant always peer reviewed that, and so it's not like we're just taking the developer's word because it's being paid by this, or excuse me, the traffic consultant is being paid before by the developer. It was always peer reviewed. That policy has changed to where now the town is running the traffic study. Obviously, I'm not doing it, Andrews, we hire a traffic consultant to do that, and is what they're doing. But all of that is always paid for by the developer. It doesn't matter what project it is, because we don't want anybody, general public, subsidizing the cost of a potential development like that. So we enter reimbursement agreements. Those pay for the cost of EIRs, traffic studies, et cetera, staff time, all that stuff. Now the town is selecting the traffic consultant and the EIR consultant, whereas in the past, before I got here, we didn't do that. So it's been fixed.
Madam Chair, I have Jenny on the line.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Jenny.
Hi there. I was under the understanding that regarding the Brace Road requests, that they came to the general plan land use committee and requested there, and they were, I might be wrong, but I thought they were told that it would be reviewed during this. And if that's the case, I think we need to follow through with what that committee said. But I also think there needs to be an application put in. Like, we can't, so whether they work with staff to do that. But it was my understanding that they did come to the land use committee.
I believe you're correct.
Yeah, it is.
And they did submit the petition, which made the request for the land use change. So in this general plan process, that's all that's been required is a petition to make the land use designation change.
But there was never any guarantee that it would be included,
Correct.
because that's the point of this discussion.
Right, yeah, exactly. And maybe we should catch up for Brian and Stephanie as far as we did discuss staff getting together with them and going over, maybe just doing RR as opposed to RA. So my understanding, the reason RA was picked was that was what it was prior to Turtle Island and the CT at Turtle Island. Some of us remember that.
Yeah, I don't think that we need like a formal application with reimbursement, all that stuff, but we do need, to have it be, the request to just come through with a petition, and, we didn't go through and verify who, those properties, we haven't done that. So we do need to get it a little bit more formalized if we're gonna proceed with this, that all of the neighbors in that area do support it, that there's some sort of a thing, not just a petition that was collected by one person, one against signature. And so the meeting that we talked about last night, I think would be a good way to kind of start that, and at least get that process going. Mm-hmm. But right now, we're not talking about, we're not saying, is it okay if we rezone it, or if we change the
Right.
definitions? We're only asking, is it okay for us to put it into the EIR and analyze that? And from my perspective, the discussion that we had during the land use committee, because we told them, submit it, and we would consider it. I do think it's probably, and because the cost is pretty minimal, there's not really a downside to that.
But the alternative is, is if they were to put the bill to do it outside of this work, they would have to pay for their own EIR.
They'd have to pay for the EIR or traffic study.
Even though they didn't have to pay for that when they had the other land use change too. It's from the 20 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know how that works.
So,
Is that something we have a vote on tonight, or a poll, for example?
What staff's looking for is a motion. It doesn't matter who makes it, if it's planning commissioners, council members, whatever. We're going to count all of you as one body for the purposes of the vote, but a motion and a second to give direction to staff to move forward with preparing the EIR and include the church property and include the Brace Road properties, or not, whatever you want the motion to be. But that's kind of like, that's the direction that staff needs.
no, you haven't had it yet.
It doesn't have to be both, it could be either or.
Right.
Is it standard to add projects for is that outside the norm. What I'm looking for is consistency throughout the entire process. So if I treat one person one way, I have to treat the other person the same exact way. So if someone comes before me for a green business park, am I adding them in at the same time, or am I gonna say, look, you're going to have to do this on your own because that's part of the process. So what I'm looking for is just consistency. I want the public to have, they know exactly what to expect. So if it's not something we're normally gonna do,
So I think you gotta look at like the magnitude of the change, that's one thing. But also the general plan has a policy and our municipal code has a policy that says the town discourages, doesn't say that we don't do that, but we discourage general plan updates, general plan amendments outside of the scope of the overall general plan update. And so the applications that we received for land use changes have been under the umbrella of an overall general plan update. There was a deadline for those requests to be considered. These two requests came after that deadline. But we also didn't get, as far as I remember, we didn't get any other requests after the deadline other than these two.
and we had 0 formal applications on either one of these.
Correct.
I might make a little comment here. I think there's kind of a distinction between the two applications. One is an application by a citizen group only for land use changes, zoning changes. The other is related to specific projects. So I think that makes a difference as to which way we go.
And also, if I may, from what I remember from our land use meeting with the church, the density that they were talking about is not what is on this. That they didn't have such a high density when we were talking to them.
Sure, they came in with an application with that density.
Yeah.
So, as we said last night, that request is out there and it's being asked to be reviewed from a land use designation standpoint. But we're also asking in this process that between the attorneys and ourselves, we look at other options, because my concern is you go and basically spot designate high density residential in the middle of a rural residential. We have no control over what goes in there, even though we may think it could be high density senior affordable housing. Once that is done, it's done. Somebody could come in there with a luxury apartment for 64 units. So we need to take a look at how we process something like that, where we process it. Is it all churches, some churches? What are the parameters where the town wants to consider that kind of basically lower income project for housing? And so definitely I think the general plan is a time to have that, because I think that would take a policy in the general plan to talk about that, and I think that would be appropriate.
And just to piggyback on that from staff's perspective, talking to Jeff last night, and Andreas can chime in, but we have significant concerns about saying all churches in town are allowed to build high density housing. Sure. Because a blanket statement like that without looking at the specific location and calling out a specific type of landowner is not a good policy for us to be in. So Andy talking about this one project is, I think we need to kind of, I don't want to focus on one project, but for the purposes of this, it's not looking at all churches, it's this one.
I just don't think that one's ready yet. I think there's still a lot of research that needs to be done, so. But given the land use request from the residents on Brace, though, they were instructed to come back. So I think that is a different situation too, Brian. Agreed.
I just like to have something formal, like we don't have anything from them. So that's just my intention is, look, I would like, to have actually something. We don't even know if the people that signed that petition are the people there. So that's my issue, is I just want to make sure that we have all of that.
Well, how is their request any different than any of their earlier requests under the general plan? A lot of the zoning changes were just brought forward as a petition by landowners. So
It was exactly the same.
But they were vetted by the committee.
Yes, right. That's the difference.
This has not been vetted by the committee. So
that's just where my struggle is.
yeah, me too. Exactly, I agree. And also there are there are impacts Oh, is that on? I don't need it anyway. Thank you, Bonnie. Now I'm off track. There are there are other. For instance, we have an application underway for a tourist destination kind of development, and he would be surrounded by different zoning, which it seems to me that's an impact. It's an impact on the people next to the people changing their zoning, and across the street, down the road. I don't know. I'm thinking this. It kind of needs to be looked at and not. Then it needs to be vetted by the committee or something. We stick it in with this. There's a lot of other issues here too.
So having served on the committee, it was looked at, and there were concerns about the access issues, and that it's just this funky triangle of residential. I mean, all of the parcels are residential right now, or church, or the swimming pool. There isn't anything new, and so it had been looked at.
Okay.
And then from what I understand is if it does pass the recommendation, our planning commission will be doing that vetting. You will be doing that work.
And to me, the request is, we want to keep our property the same, and I may be wrong, but because of new legislation, not SB 330, but the other legislation, and you hope it doesn't happen here, but it's possible that somebody comes in as people, move on, or they sell their properties, and somebody says, okay, it's CT, I can build a 6-unit duplex on this property and tear it down, right? I mean, isn't that the law?
Yes.
Okay, so to their concern.
So is your contention the law, or is your contention what they can build?
Contention.
Well, like,
contention. No, what I'm saying is what their request is to protect what the status quo is. And if they're protecting the status quo, then how does that have impact? Now, the impact would be, I want my property to be able to build 6-unit duplexes. Now that would be an impact. Don't you think?
I would say the status quo is the zoning it has and has had for over a decade.
The CT zone.
Yeah, that's the status quo.
My point is,
this
with
is
the new laws, that, okay, in Martinez there were duplexes. A guy came in and he bought them all for $800,000 in a row, and now he's building 6-unit duplexes instead of just duplexes. 6 multi-family units. So my point is, and I don't know, I may be wrong, but it sounds like to me that's the concern, is if under CT allows for, greater, multiplex.
More intensity.
More intensive. So then I would be concerned if I lived on that road. I don't know how anyone else feels. I mean.
But I think, aren't we?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, aren't we just supposed to be talking about whether it's included in the EIR? I mean, we're not making any decisions here,
Right.
whether it's right or wrong.
In the direction last night, or not direction, but what we spoke about last night is that staff would meet with the applicants and talk about the best way of doing it. We're just talking about whether we include it in the EIR, and it doesn't seem to cost that much more, and impacts would be studied there. So it'd be the same as the previous. If people get hung up on, well, they didn't make the deadline, that's an issue, that's a contention, but as far as like giving the people opportunity, especially during the land use committee, if that's what was discussed at the land use committee, and that's what I'm hearing, from the people who were at the land use committee, then it seems like that would be the right thing to do for that particular thing. I don't know about the churches, because we had a different discussion last night about the churches, which, could have something.
All right. Well, do you guys want to talk about the Brace Road properties separately, and then we'll talk about the church, and take a poll, or do you have more?
I'd be willing to maybe throw a motion,
Okay.
see if it flies.
Okay.
Is that I think the Brace Road I'll call an petition, be included into the general plan update in the EIR.
Okay.
And that's only that Bridge Road area, not to include the church and the school.
Okay,
I'll
we have a
second that.
motion,
I'll
all
second.
right, and may we have roll call, please? Let's see, Chairman Abramovich?
I made the motion, yes.
Jeff Duncan?
Aye.
Councilmember Baker?
Aye.
Councilmember Kretz? Aye. Mayor Nisley?
Aye.
Commissioner London?
Aye.
Commissioner Kelly?
No.
Commissioner Hogan?
No.
Commissioner Youngblood? No.
So what do we end up?
63.
63, motion passes, correct?
That's right.
Do you need another motion to incorporate, to go ahead and recommend
It
the
would be
entire
nice to
general
have,
plan?
it'd be nice to have a motion that the staff proceeds to process the general plan and circulate it and to prepare the environmental impact report and circulate it.
I'll make a motion.
Wait, we also need a motion, either up or down motion on the church property.
We did.
That was included.
It was included.
No, that was not.
It was
That was
specific.
just Brace Road.
I separated it out.
Oh.
So the motion was only for Brace Road.
Oh, okay.
And no
Okay,
church.
yes.
And the other's
I
still
thought you
hanging
said,
out.
okay.
So we need a motion either up or down, either way, on the church property.
Do we want to insure the church and the school?
No,
No,
just the
Just
church.
Okay.
I mean, I'll make a motion since I already thought that I already voted on that. I'll make a motion that the church be excluded from the recommendation.
Excluded.
Excellent.
Excluded.
Second that.
Okay, roll call please. Councilmember Clark Kretz? Yes. Councilmember Baker?
Aye.
Councilmember Duncan?
Aye.
Mayor Nisley?
Yes.
Commissioner London?
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly?
Commissioner Kelly?
Yes.
I hope I got that right.
Commissioner Hogan?
I feel like we included the other, we should include this, but I'm not gonna be the only dissenter.
I'm with you, Mike, you're right on that one.
So I say yes, you know, I wanna have consensus between the group.
Commissioner Youngblood?
I agree with, yeah, Mike. I don't want to be the only dissenter either, but I want to have consensus, so yes.
Chairman Abramovich?
Yes.
All right. And now we need another motion. Or did you already?
Yeah, I did that.
So we need a second for Brian's motion, which was to accept the general plan and
Circulate.
recommend it to.
And EIR.
and EIR.
We have a question from Bonnie.
Okay.
Did you want more direction though on the specific issues or the scope of the environmental analysis?
No, those have been recorded, so they will be in the scoping that we do. Nope.
And the scoping period goes into the 16th.
Right, and the scoping period goes to the 16th, but no, those are included. We don't need direction on those.
Or alternatives to explore, or?
If you have some thoughts on alternatives, they haven't been discussed yet. Those could either come tonight in a motion or in written comments for the EIR.
There's a motion and a second.
But there is a motion, yeah.
It's the motion is to accept. Okay. Can we have roll call, please?
Yes.
And it was a motion by Brian and a second by Stephanie. Okay.
accept one.
When they motion, do I still list their names as roll call or? Councilmember Baker?
Aye.
Commissioner Youngblood?
Aye.
Councilmember Clark Kretz? Aye. Councilmember Duncan?
Aye.
Mayor Nisley?
Yes.
Commissioner London?
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly?
Yes.
Commissioner Hogan?
Yes,
Chairman Rodgers?
Yes.
that's a lot better than the US Conference.
That is right.
And I'm sorry, point of clarification, did we say that the Grace Road would be processed as RR or RA?
We did not. We just said it's going to be.
It would be looked at.
Yeah. Looked at.
Work with staff to be determined.
Yeah.
Because they said yesterday that they probably want to change what they put on the app. It's no application, but what they have put on.
And I'm sorry, and staff is gonna meet with them and talk about
Right.
it, so.
Right. They're supposed to call us and Mary Beth will set up that meeting.
All right. So,
That's
is that
what
it?
we needed.
Anybody else have any comments?
I'd like to, so when you do the land use, so with the chart where we have, the no net loss rules, will you be looking at the different tiers of uses, so of density, so like with BP, looking at, RE and possibly RR?
We had a recommendation from the committee on, I believe, RE. What we can do is discuss with the environmental consultant about other designations as one of the alternatives, so we can have that discussion. But generally, what you want to do in an environmental document is kind of have what I call the worst case scenario. So if you bring it down from a traffic standpoint or an environmental standpoint, you can still approve it. So if you look at your environmental document as an umbrella, the law basically says you can do stuff under everything you evaluated, but if you poke out of that umbrella, then you have to do your supplemental environmental documentation. So we'll be working with the environmental consultant, Matthew, to make sure that we have that large enough umbrella, that you as a commission and you as a council have that ability to have discretion when it comes to making decisions.
And what about with the Alice's Fruit Stand to go from GC to RM, or, you know, like, would you look at the two differences if it were GC?
We had a recommendation from the committee, so again, we'll take a look at it from the standpoint that we have an environmental document that gives you some flexibility to make those decisions. Because it's GC right now, pretty much any residential is below GC, I think you're going to be okay to make other decisions.
Go ahead.
Okay, I can't remember, so point of clarification from last night, and if I need to follow up. We were discussing the business park properties, and there was discussion about whether RE or RR, since it's contiguous to both. Will that be looked at, or do I need to fill out the scoping form?
I would like you to fill out the scoping form, but given that you made the statement, given Bonnie made the statement, we will look at it. We will look at it.
Thank you, Ann.
When in doubt,
Yeah,
fill out the scoping form.
I'll come to your office.
You know, the last thing, and I mentioned it last night, but I really do appreciate the effort that all of you put into chairing and sub-chairing the committees, and, you know, it was a lengthier process than we anticipated, but I have to say those meetings were excellent with the discussion we had and the issues that came up, and I think it really has helped clarify your general plan, so thank you. It is really helpful.
There it is.
Jenny has her hand up. Oh,
I just want to echo that. We did say thank you to the committees, but I think reading through these, I wasn't on all the committees. It was an excellent job with what they went through, and I'm pretty proud of our town. So good job.
Well, thank you to you and Christy and Mary Beth and Andrews and all the other folks that helped us out. I thought it was a really great team, and I mean, I loved working with you guys, and I feel like we're really lucky to have you. So, thank you. All right. So with that, any other comments? We miss you, Mayor Nisley.
How's the weather?
Can't wait for you to come home.
Oh, it's been interesting. I'm ready to come. Well, I'm ready to. I'm having a good time, but I'm ready to come home.
All right. All right. Well, with that, we will adjourn at 7:54. Thank you, everybody.